on, the sharpest response post the controversy, billionaire Gautam Adani's group has released a statement and refuted allegations, raising questions on foreign direct investment into the conglomerate and termed it to be a competitive race, quote unquote, to tear down the conglomerate. This is the latest statement that is coming in from the Adani Group amid many questions that are being raised, and Adani trying to settle all of the fingers that are now pointing at them. This is Adani versus Financial Times, and the claims that are coming in as they are saying that these allegations that are being leveled against them is something that they completely refute, and questions on foreign direct investment into the conglomerate and termed it to be a competitive race to tear down the conglomerate is not something that they stand by. Niranjan is joining us live on the broadcast to give us further details on the same. Over to you, Niranjan.
Basically, what they've done is it's perhaps one of the most aggressive counters and the aggressive statements that has been put out by the Adani Group ever since this controversy began a few months back. It's a very sharp response, and we have the details of the response. The fact is, they've put out details of their transactions, and they've asked FT or the Financial Times to pull back on their article. FT, on his part, as per the latest update, has not pulled down the article. Let me go through the rejoinder or the rebuttal put out by Adani to FT on the reports that was on the report that was published. First of all, they're calling it inaccurate reporting by the Financial Times, and they have also, what they've done is they put out a detailed press release a few days back, and in that press release they put facts out of this transaction that was reported, which they called as inaccurate reporting by the Financial Times. And this was a letter that was written by the Adani Group to the editor of the Financial Times, or FT, and they said in that letter that your article of the 22nd of March, which was titled Indian Data Reveals Adani Empire's Reliance on Offshore Funding, and they called it, they said, on the face of it, it's a mendacious, deliberate effort to attempt to paint the Adani family and the Adani Group in the worst possible light. And in doing so, they said, it reveals a willingness to be selective in using publicly available facts, lazy in its approach to understanding the disclosures to which your reporters were directed, and makes insinuations that are false and damaging. And they go on to put out their version of it. They say, our statement to your reporter that all the transactions about which the FT inquired have been publicly disclosed is accurate, and the story amply demonstrates that your reporters conveniently chose not to look in a meaningful way at those public disclosures or even at the related press releases which the Adani Group has been putting out on almost a daily basis. They also say that if your reporters had taken fully into account all those filings and these public disclosures, they would have simply been unable to conclude with any honesty their subjective epithets about hard to scrutinize money flows, in quotes, hard to scrutinize money flows, opaque overseas investments, which FT claimed was prevalent on the part of the Adani Group, and funds of unclear provenance, as claimed by the Financial Times. Now, they go on to say in the detailed statement that has been put out, they say that, in fact, as publicly disclosed on the 18th of January 2021, and once again on the 23rd of January 2021, the Adani Group's promoters raised $2 billion through the sale of a 20% stake in Adani Green Energy to Total Energies of France, a fact that the Financial Times reported but chose to ignore completely in the 22nd of March 2023 story. So, and then they go on to further put out some of the facts there. It's a very aggressive counter where they're putting out facts to counter the FT article. They say that in October 2019, the promoters had raised $700 million through the sale of 37.4% stake in Adani Total Gas, a fact published in an Adani press release. Again, the Financial Times chose to ignore this fact in its article, although it did publish the news at that time. So they're pointing to how FT had published about the stake sale, but refused to take into account all of this in their latest article, which is why they're claiming that it's a factual inaccuracy. In fact, they're also saying that the funds that were received as part of the stake sale were reinvested by promoter entities to support the growth of the new business. and in portfolio companies such as Adani Enterprises, Adani Ports, Special Projects, Special Economic Zone, Adani Transmission, Adani Power. And they go on to further say that the promoter entities have had substantial holdings in Adani companies which have increased over time. And it's through the timely use of funds received through the sale of equity that these entities have been able to increase their investment. So essentially, it's a very detailed sort of a response they've given, and they also talk about in one point of at one point in the press release, they say your story incorrectly mixed primary and secondary investments and also ignored entirely a secondary transaction of $2 billion. Also that the reporters could conveniently create an illusion of $2 billion gap in funding to support their preconceived thesis of supposed round-tripping. So essentially a very strongly worded counter by the Adani Group, where they claim that facts have not been considered of how the monies were raised, but goes on to sort of create this picture about offshore funding, which they claim is inaccurate, because they've also put out details of where they've invested and how the monies came in. And they go on to say that the article has no qualms about contradicting itself. They quote 2 paragraphs to show how the FT article is contradictory in its own submission as it appears in the website. It says, they say that the article has no qualms about contradicting itself in order to create innuendos. For example, the story claims that most offshore shell companies supplying FDI to the conglomerate have been disclosed as part of Adani's promoter group, meaning they are closely tied to Adani and his immediate family. That's part one. So they talk about that. And yet soon after, the story reports, and I quote, analysts said the money moving from obscure Mauritius entities was concerning because it is impossible to ascertain whether or not the funds had been round-trip. Now, so basically, they've gone on to contradict what the Financial Times has said, and they've listed the details of the 2.87 billion stake sales in group firms since 2019 and how this money was raised. Back to you for now.